Serious question. Story 1. I was visiting some friends at college. I saw my ex-girlfriend's car, who cheated on me, parked in the lot below the balcony walkway. Being extremely petty at the time, I hooked the back of my knees on the rail, had two trusted friends hold my arms, dropped my pants, and launched a prank on her windshield. We still talk about that 40 years later. Story 2. About 1,000,000 years ago, I was at a bachelor party for my then-wife's sister's future husband in our town. At about 3 a.m., I left the club absolutely drunk. I lived about a mile from the venue, so I decided to walk home. About halfway, I suddenly had the urgent need to defecate and could tell it was going to be explosive. I was walking past a house with a low brick wall at the front, so I dropped my pants and sat on the wall with my backside hanging over the back. One large explosion later, I had polluted the front garden with the most vile excrement you could imagine. I felt much better and carried on home. Fast forward 25 years, and I am divorced and going out with a lovely woman. We were invited to her friend's house for dinner. It was the first time I had met them. We arrived at that same house. Story 3. I'm a middle school teacher. When I get to work in the morning, I have a 15-minute walk from the train station to the school. The walk takes me through a residential area where many of the students at school live. I have always struggled with getting really urgent bowel movements in the morning. Once, while walking to work, it hit me suddenly. I had either to find a spot to relieve myself within 1 minute or have an accident. I found some trees behind a shed, squatted down, and quickly relieved myself. This happened on a street where many of my students live, about 10 minutes before school starts, so the likelihood of any of my students or other students from school seeing me and possibly recording me was alarmingly high. Thankfully, no one saw me. I had to walk to school without properly cleaning up, with the possibility that a rumor or video would soon surface that I had hurriedly relieved myself in a student's backyard. It was not a high point of my life, to say the least. Story 4. I was a water well driller for 22 years. I was 27 years old, drilling an irrigation well on a job site in the middle of nowhere. Typically, there was no one else on the drilling site, so I had to go. There was a field close by with thin, dry stalks of some type of tall grass. As I walked into the field, I realized there wasn't any real concealment. It was just the volume of those stalks blocking a clear view from a distance. I was squatting when I heard the telltale sound of a helicopter coming right at me. Sure enough, the helicopter flew right over me, with a glass window below the nose looking straight down at me. We waved at one another, and they flew on by. It was a crazy place to have to go, and an even crazier thing to happen while doing so. Story 5. In the crater of Mount St. Helens, where I was bike camping illegally, I had nothing but small ash pebbles to bury it with. Story 6. I used to work as a sewer technician. One day, I had to clean the main standing sewer line of a 55-story building. We cleaned those systems from the top down through the vent of the system. I didn't have time to go downstairs, so I used the roof vent of the system. It was the craziest place and, at the same time, the place with the most astonishing view ever. Fun story. Not me, but a colleague wanted to do the same on a different building. However, he didn't notice that he removed the cap of the normal ventilation of the apartment on the top floor. He used the vent and the waste fell onto the kitchen floor of that house. It was heavy enough to take the vent cover with it. He had some explaining to do. Story 7. In an empty meal ready-to-eat box in the middle of the Iraqi desert, surrounded by a company-sized group of men and women, all cheering me on enthusiastically. Story 8. During a rotation at the Joint Readiness Training Center, my unit set up next to an old impact area. Sleep-deprived, I walked a little way off the patrol base to relieve myself, entrenching tool and meal ready to eat as makeshift toilet paper in hand. After finishing, I noticed an unexploded 155mm shell right next to the hole I had dug. Story 9. Bathroom in a questionable gas station in the middle of nowhere, Texas. It had its own beehive in the corner. Story 10. In a strip club in Florida, I was tripping on mushrooms. I had stomach issues, and the toilet was disgusting with no door, so people coming in could directly see me. Story 11. Underwater during a scuba dive, The urge came on suddenly and there was no waiting. I swam off by myself to duck behind some coral and let go. Fish swarmed the area to get rid of the evidence. Story 12. On top of the tallest sand dune on a rural beach, I have stomach issues and sometimes you just have to go. After locking myself away for a little bit, I decided not to let it hold me back and went out to do what I wanted, which meant being caught out sometimes. My logic was that the beach was quiet. However, if I was anywhere except the highest point, someone could come around the corner and see me. So I went to the very tallest dune. I could see anyone coming before they got there, and the top was sort of concaved like a volcano, so nobody could actually see my body, just my head. I looked like I was just sitting there enjoying the view. Most picturesque bowel movement I have ever had. Story 13. As a firefighter, I had to relieve myself in a house that was on fire. Well, the fire was mostly out and we were doing overhaul operations. The options were to go to a neighbor's house if possible, use the yard of the house on fire, or relieve myself inside. Choices were made, and let's just say I'm not the first to do this, nor the last. Also, as a paramedic and grandfather dealing with some medical issues, I once asked, "Ma'am, may I use your restroom?" Lastly, I had a friend who urgently needed to relieve himself while near heavy road construction and pulled over to use a construction worker's portable toilet. Story 14. Not a crazy place, but a crazy situation. I was at a customer's house and my stomach was really bothering me that day, so I asked to use their bathroom. I gave the person a heads up that it was a number 2, and he said it was all right. People have told me I cannot use their bathroom at all, so I'm always upfront. I knew it was going to be bad, but this had to be the smelliest, most awful projectile diarrhea I have ever had in my life. I got a knock on the door, and it was the guy working with me. He said, "Dude, I can smell that all the way upstairs." I was trying to flush politely, but the toilet clogged. I thought, okay, I'll put that on hold and try to open the window. While struggling to open the window, the curtain rod fell and made a huge bang. When I finally opened the window, the alarm system started going off. Front window open, front window open. I was panicking at this point, dripping sweat, soaking in all this awful stink, all while the toilet was filled to the brim with wastewater. After cleaning up as much as I could, I had to find the customer and ask him for a plunger, all while the whole house smelled like a sewer. By far the most memorable experience I have ever had. Story 15. I had a friend do a local hike and send me a picture of a deposit he made, high above the city. He specifically said it was at 2,600 feet. I saw this as a challenge. I drove to a remote mountain spot where I could reach 3,000 feet, made my own deposit, took an expertly framed and edited photo, and sent it to him. I became the highest depositor. Instead of accepting that he was outdone and my deposit was indeed higher, he hiked up one of the largest mountains in the area and sent a 6,800-foot deposit. There it was in all its glory, a large, corn-imbued deposit in a place so high he knew I could not top it. I have yet to drive out of state to visit one of the taller mountains, but it will happen. Story 16. Footwell of my car while the withdrawals from heroin set in. I hadn't had a bowel movement for about 2 weeks, and my dealer was taking a long time to arrive. It is a very depressing memory, but I remember I am not addicted anymore. Therefore, I will hopefully never have to relieve myself in the footwell of my car again. Story 17. I once had a large bowel movement on a huge anthill, and it caused chaos. My waste resembled a human version of the Triceratops droppings from Jurassic Park. The ants went wild. I got away before they knew what to do or whom to attack. Story 18. The woods. That is the only place I have ever defecated besides in a toilet since I was potty trained. Now, the weirdest places I have ever urinated is a different story. Story 19. Not me, my best mate back in 1983. There was a disused coal slack yard with a 150-foot drop from the top, where a metal square of girders sat above, with nothing between them other than that drop. My mate dropped his pants, put his feet on the lower girder, and held himself with his elbows on the top of the girders. Watching his droppings fall and hit a concrete slab from 150 feet up was a sight to behold as a 10-year-old. It was also very dangerous looking back. Story 20. Not me, but a friend. He was dating a real estate agent and went along to a showing. Just before the prospective buyers arrived, he had an irresistible urge to use the bathroom. So he went into the bathroom and relieved himself, just as he heard them pulling into the driveway. In desperation, he wiped himself with one of the towels on display because there was no tissue and opened the windows. Within 5 minutes, the buyers were in the bathroom getting shown around, and the odor was still strong despite the windows being open. Not sure if they saw the towel, but suffice to say they did not put in an offer. Story 21. 75 feet up a tree, I had experienced digestive discomfort the night before and was climbing to perform some tree maintenance. I lost control of my bowels from that height and used oak leaves to clean myself. Story 22. I once had an accident while falling out of a moving pickup truck traveling through the jungle late at night on a small Thai island. Story 23. I was sick downstairs while driving down a highway. There was a long stretch between exits with no bushes on the side of the highway. I found a couple of grocery bags and paper towels in my pickup, pulled down my pants and let it rip. Felt like it would never end. As I was finishing up, a police officer pulled behind me, came up, and tapped on the window. He asked what I was doing, and I told him I was sick and couldn't wait. He said to finish up. The wiping, like trying to remove a permanent marker with a tissue, just wouldn't end. When done, I climbed back into the driver's seat and signaled the officer. I opened my window and he said, "License and..." "Ugh, that's horrible. Just move along, sir. There's a gas station at the next exit." "Damn, that's awful. Feel better, sir." Then he left. It was an evil smell. It turned out I had Clostridioides difficile infection. That, my friends, is the worst. I had to stop every 3 exits. Took a long time to get home. Now I always make sure I have bags and paper towels in my truck. Story 24. In the sea, it is called an aquabog. It is best to dive down and swim away. If you swim away, the eddy currents will make it chase you. Story 25. In a guy's boots, I wiped with his sock. Story time. This was in the Marines doing training at 29 Palms. Story 26. Middle of the Sinai Desert in Egypt. I had an accident and had to bury my pants and clean myself with sand. Story 27. At the top of a mountain, I felt like I needed to use the restroom but not urgently. I assumed there would be a toilet at the summit. For hours later, I couldn't hold it any longer and had to relieve myself in the snow because there was no toilet available. The waste is probably still frozen there. Several French tourists took photos of me in that moment. Story 28. Back of my uncle's car stuck in traffic. I have post-traumatic stress disorder from it. Not the first time, second time, back of my friend's car and my wife's car. Checked for irritable bowel syndrome and sadly it's from anxiety and stress. Story 29. While scuba diving inside a shipwreck in the Red Sea in Egypt, the boat food did not sit well with me. Story 30. Over the edge of a loading dock ramp at a store behind a local mall. Years ago, when I was a volunteer firefighter, I had an intense urge to defecate while inside a burning house. I quickly used the toilet in the burning house. Story 31. Visited Harvard just to say I have been there. Made it a point to use the restroom in their school bookstore. Not crazy, but that's the smartest thing I ever did. Summa cum laude. Story 32. When I was 17, I had a severe accident involving a jet ski that caused serious injury and nearly led to sepsis. Now that I have your attention, 17-year-old me on a jet ski thought, "Hey, I should ask that wakeboard boat if they will make me a large wake." They agreed, so I decided to hit a 5 to 6 foot wake at 64 miles per hour, which is top speed. I flew probably 20 to 30 feet into the air. The jet ski landed before me and rolled, and I landed on my backside onto the handlebars. A significant amount of both blood and other fluids came out of me. I had to strip my shorts in the lake to wash them out. Then I had to endure roughly 3 miles of riding the jet ski back to shore to go to the hospital. The wound became infected, so I needed antibiotics. For those wondering, about a week later, the injury healed and function returned to normal. Story 33. In a ditch on the side of the road in the middle of Iraq while Fallujah was being attacked back in 2004, there was a lull in action, so those who had to do their thing took that opportunity. It was probably the fastest bowel movement I have ever taken. Story 34. In a newspaper, I neatly folded it and put it in my neighbor's mailbox. I was about 7 years old at the time. Story 35. A Turkish toilet in Greece. Using leaves in the woods as toilet paper was less traumatic. An honorable mention goes to a multi-day music festival. The portable toilets were terrible. Each morning, I would dig a hole in front of my truck and close the corners of a small tarp under my hood. I would hang off the bumper and do my business. When I was done, I would fill in the hole and pull my truck forward a couple of feet to have fresh ground for the next time. A second honorable mention goes to multi-day canoe trips. I would defecate while floating on my back. Heading upstream meant that the current carried away the waste. Story 36. Side of a mountain as the sun went down. I used a boulder to prop myself up in the middle of a combat training rotation. The second one was in the middle of a desert, almost getting run over by an armored vehicle at night as a convoy of them drove past me while I relieved myself. Story 37. I proudly used the restroom on the observation deck at the Willis Tower when it was the tallest building in the world. Flushing a sacred part of me from over 1,000 feet in the air, at what I assumed to be 1,000 miles per hour, has always stayed with me and is a memory I will always look back on with fondness. Story 38. On the literal side of the road, I opened the door on the passenger side, rested the edge of my body on the door sill, relieved myself, wiped, and left it all right there. I was really glad I at least had a napkin to wipe with, but no way to clean up. There was just no choice. Taco Bell. Story 39. Jungle at night in northwest Thailand during a jungle trek about 28 years ago. The sounds of many insects and animals moving around in the undergrowth and canopy were remarkable. Story 40. The Sea of Cortez in Baja. We were relaxing at the beach. There was no way I was going to make it back to the beach club bathroom, so I swam out as far as I could and relieved myself in the ocean. Sorry, not sorry, everyone. Story 41. While hiking in the bushes with my friend who was 5 meters away, he accidentally sat on his own waist. Still funny. Years later, while running, I suddenly felt the need to relieve myself and had to jump into a bush, hoping no one saw me. It did help me feel a lot better afterward. Story 42. In a shoebox while driving. It was such an emergency that I couldn't even stop at a public restroom. If I stood up and moved an inch, it was game over. Every ounce of my strength was needed to hold it in. My only goal was to try and make it home to safe territory. I was stopped at a red light, and I knew that the fight was over. If I didn't have that empty shoebox on my passenger floor, I have no idea what I would have done. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe noticing it was what made it happen. Either way, I survived. But as you can imagine, it was not pretty. Story 43. Off a cell tower at 470 feet. Did not feel like climbing down and back up again. Also did not think I would make it in time. Yes, there was an impact crater. It was in the wintertime. Story 44. Unintentionally? My pants after a first date. Intentionally? Maybe the work bathroom. I am very reserved about where I sit. I have only pooped outside of my house about 10 times in my whole life. Story 45. I am a hobbyist photographer and I was on vacation on the East Coast in Canada. I got up early to photograph birds on a rock on the beach. I had to do some light climbing over some treacherous, slippery rocks for about 30 minutes. Once I got to the location and got set up, suddenly I felt the need to use the restroom urgently. I thought about going to the restroom at the parking lot, but the second I tried climbing back, I knew I wouldn't make it. Since no one was around and it was happening any second, I dropped my pants and relieved myself right there on the rocks. Kept coming for about 5 minutes. As I was almost finished, I heard gasps and turned my head while still squatting. I looked up on a rock to see a wife, husband, and 2 children looking at me squatting over a pile of waste with a camera on a tripod that until then I hadn't realized was aimed right at me. Story 46. Not crazy, but on my first night on the trail at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico, I used an uncovered latrine under the stars. It was about 65 degrees with no humidity. Hands down, the best experience I've ever had. Story 47. I had diarrhea on a rocky and narrow part of the hike and had to use a bag off to the side in full view of other hikers. Then I had to carry that bag the rest of the way up and all the way back down. People were surprisingly understanding and respectful by not staring and just acting like I wasn't even there. Kudos to those other hikers on the mountain. Story 48. In a meal ready-to-eat bag while on deployment, I was on post while the platoon was out on patrol. I couldn't hold it anymore, so I opened my meal ready-to-eat, dumped the contents, and relieved myself. I couldn't take it down with me, and I certainly couldn't leave it up there, so I threw it from the tower. After tossing it, I realized there were kids who stood by the tower all the time to talk or get some of the items we didn't want from a meal ready to eat. I looked over after realizing what I had done, and before I could say anything, they were all over it and certainly not pleased. It was an honest mistake, but I can only imagine that the Pashto they were speaking was anything but kind words. Story 49. I was just 19, out of town, and very drunk well before I arrived at a big New Year's Eve party. I had been drinking for a long time and ate a lot of unhealthy food during the day, which caused severe diarrhea. The party was in a large banquet hall with about 500 people. There was only one men's bathroom, and it had a single stall. The bathroom was crowded with men. I managed to get inside, but the floor was splashed, and I experienced a massive, foul diarrhea episode. People were yelling and screaming, banging on the stall door. I heard someone enter and say, "Goddamn, what's that smell?" I ran through a gauntlet of punches and swearing, made it outside, and then vomited on my shoes. Story 50. I was at a bar watching a World Wrestling Entertainment pay-per-view event a long time ago. I ate a bowl of chili, and it upset my stomach. The bathroom was disgusting, so I walked outside, went down the street, and defecated beside someone's garage. Then, I continued down the street, sneaked into my grandfather's basement, and used his toilet. After that, I headed back and finished watching the event. Story 51. On the double yellow line in a blind curve on a relatively busy road, we waited for about 5 minutes until someone finally ran over it. Life in a small town. Story 52. Kicked out by my ex with a cat in a car when the surrounding community was hostile to homeless people looking for a bathroom. Yes, I went in the litter box. Story 53. Into a waste bag on Mount Baker. There was a waterfall from a glacier, and I could see the Pacific Ocean in the distance. Story 54. I have liver problems and started this medication that at first makes you have frequent and unexpected bowel movements. I was outside with my dogs, as I did not have a fully fenced yard yet, when I felt an urgent need. I could not get the dogs to come inside, but on my deck was a mop bucket I had recently used. So I grabbed the bucket, ran into the garage, and relieved myself. Story 55. On our third date, we drove up to Steamboat Springs in the mountains from Denver. I took her the scenic route instead of Interstate 70. Towns are sparse in that part of the mountains, and of course my stomach became very upset in the middle of nowhere. I had to pull off the road and run to some bushes. That was our final date. Story 56. In a bathroom on the Klein-Matterhorn Glacier. There was no running water. It had a plastic liner that would be heat-sealed shut when you flushed. Story 57. When I traveled more, I began to take note of the interesting places I have used the restroom. Originally from the United States of America, my favorites were one of the bathrooms in the Eiffel Tower, one in the Colosseum in Rome, and one way up on the Rock of Gibraltar. Story 58. I used to work in underground mining. One day, I urgently needed to relieve myself. It was a well-known practice to keep a plastic geology sample bag in our work utility vehicles along with a heap of rags for this exact situation. I pulled into an empty level, placed the sample bag on the ground, added a layer of rags, hung off the bull bar, and had one of the largest bowel movements of my life, straight out with no resistance. Good form, good consistency, held its shape, and was an easy cleanup. I bagged it up, placed it on the back of the work utility vehicle until I got back to the surface, and then disposed of it. Story 59. My friend asked me to let his dogs out one night while he was away. He said to just go through the back gate and that the back door would be unlocked. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, the Hefeweizens I drank earlier really caught up fast. Easy peasy, I thought, I'll just go in and light up his bathroom while the dogs do their business. Except I could not get the gate open. I guess my brain was clogged because I just couldn't figure out the latch. I panicked, pulled down my pants, and let it rip right there in his driveway. Luckily, there was a hose nearby to wash away the evidence. I figured out the gate almost immediately after, went inside, let the dogs out, and finished cleaning up like nothing happened. He didn't even know. Story 60. Between a Humvee and a block wall in Iraq during a foot patrol. The first couple of weeks were rough on all of us. Story 61. Under a bridge while out fishing. That morning cup of coffee went through pretty fast that day. Story 62. Somewhere between St. Louis and Columbia, Missouri, in the tall wet grass just off Interstate 70 at 5 a.m., when nothing was open yet. It was glorious. Story 63. I used to move furniture. We were alone unloading at some storage units. My friend had to use the restroom. I told him to use a box, tape it closed, and write "Do not open" on the box. He left it in a random unit. Story 64. There is a lookout drop toilet without a front on the cliffs of the South Island of New Zealand. I cannot remember the exact town, but it was really cool. A cubicle on the cliff. Just me using the toilet at 6 a.m., looking at penguins. Story 65. In my younger days, I would defecate wherever I was when the mood struck me. In the car, at the grocery store, and in a pew at church are just a few of the locations where I casually did so. I grew out of it, but one day when I am much older, I may get back into the habit. Story 66. 3 a.m. in a blizzard on a snowfield just under the summit of one of the tallest mountains. I reached the summit the next day and carried that waist down in a bag. Story 67. Kings Canyon, Watarka National Park, Northern Territory, Australia. I had been fighting off a stomach illness while doing the Kings Canyon hike. Halfway through, I needed to stop urgently. I stepped off the trail for about 5 minutes and had an accident in the middle of the outback. It was not my proudest or safest moment, but it could have been worse. I was not going to continue the rest of the hike in that condition. Story 68. Behind an empty tennis court next to the woods because they locked all the bathrooms and it was an emergency. Story 69. On a tree line next to a county road on the prairie, United States Flatlanders always have toilet paper in the car, truck, or farm equipment. Story 70. I was playing disc golf during the pandemic. I have irritable bowel syndrome or something similar. Instead of pooping in the woods, where someone else's disc might land, I hastily walked over to the porta potties, which were locked because of coronavirus disease. Usually, I have a bucket in my van, but it was at the dealership and I had a small SUV loaner that didn't have a bucket. So before I used my pants, I used the gutter of the curb. I cleaned it up as best I could. I was already upset my van was broken. Now I was upset because I pretty much didn't make it in time. Then I was upset because I had to tell my friend I had an accident and needed a shower. I will always have a bucket in any vehicle I travel in. It may be disguised as a tote to carry tools or something, but it is a bucket for when my stomach demands urgency, and I don't have time to ask how high. Story 71. At the work restroom during my shift, my supervisor followed me in 10 minutes later to remind me to log back in. I had a bad stomach at the time as well. Story 72. Here. Story 73. Pooped in the forest when I was in the military. I think that's the only time I have taken a dump on porcelain. Story 74. Out surfing. Felt the urge, then the surge. Slid off my board, dropped my shorts, swam a bit, then let it happen. That damned monkey tail followed me around too. Story 75. In some bushes, I took medication that apparently did not agree with my bowels. I had to defecate urgently and saw no other option. The relief was monumental. Story 76. Right after I graduated high school, I snuck onto the football field one morning when I knew that few people would be there, and left a mess directly on the midfield logo. That's how much I disliked my high school and many of the students I went there with. This act did nothing in the grand scheme of things, aside from giving extra work to the groundskeepers, but it felt cathartic in that moment. Story 77. In a hole while getting 15-year-old Russian mortars and rockets thrown at me by some bearded men in dresses. Story 78. I relieved myself in the woods during my long run today, which is not unusual. On a run long ago, I relieved myself behind a country church near my house. Without toilet paper, I used my underwear and disposed of them under the utility shed behind the church. Story 79. In open air, not in water. When that waste is not in water, it produces an unbelievable stench. Many people have never experienced it. The first time I defecated in the forest directly onto the ground, I almost passed out in the tall grass from the smell. Story 80. In the back storeroom of a grocery store, I was drunk, desperate to find the bathroom and about to soil my pants. I am definitely at fault for doing it. Story 81. A small public park. I was minutes away from any store, and there was no way I was making it. I dropped my shorts and did not even urinate. It exploded out of me into a tiny obscured corner. I felt awful about it for a long time. Someone definitely found it. I was very sick. Story 82. I defecated while surfing an overhead wave at Playa Negra in Costa Rica. My friend defecated in a coconut on the beach while everyone else had gone in. Watching, I pulled my body out of the water, pointed it at the boys on a long cruising wave, and dropped a log. On the same trip, we surfed 2 oceans in one day. I crossed many things off my bucket list on that day. Story 83. Severe diarrhea occurred near a soccer goal at a school after walking back from an adult entertainment venue. I cut through the high school soccer field to get home. About halfway through the field, the alcohol from the venue began to affect me. The good news was that it was not soccer season. My friend sacrificed his shirt to help. Story 84. A long time ago, when I was a child, I got in trouble at home. My father instructed me to stand in a corner and not move until he said so. I obeyed. Story 85. There is a famous 7-tier waterfall in Thailand, and I got sick while waiting in the 5th tier. Sorry, folks. Story 86. If you have ever seen the Grand Tour, that desert in Season 1, Episode 1 was dirt biking there. The place is called El Mirage. There is nothing there. I had to ride my bike to a place with some kind of cover. I took all my bottom gear off and released Satan. My boxers are out there. Satan's son was left at the first liquor store. I feel so bad for the janitor. Story 87. Portable toilet in the desert when it was 120 degrees outside. Had to strip down out of full body armor to use it. I cannot complain. I know many people who used burn pit latrines around the same time. Story 88. A couple of friends and I lived in a large housing development that had a big forest area where we often played as kids. One day, while playing in the woods, I had to go to the bathroom. We had all gone in the woods before. It was not ideal, unless you found a bathroom tree. I spotted a tree that was easy to climb and had a good spot to hang your butt off. All of us used that tree for an entire summer. Story 89. I had 2 experiences. One was in my car at the border checkpoint with a 3-hour wait time. The other was at a drive-in. I had to sit on a trash can and relieve myself because the only stall was occupied. Story 90. I went for a hike in the woods with broken ligaments and cartilage in my knee. I really had to use the bathroom in the morning, but the only washroom was down from our tents, accessible only through a ditch leading to a valley. It was an Indian-style seat. I gathered all my strength in my other knee, sat down for 2 to 3 seconds, and relieved myself as fast as a Formula 1 pit stop, all in one go. I then got up holding the wall, crying and sweating. That day, I relieved myself to survive. Story 91. When I was 4, I went to the side of my house because my aunt was taking too long in the bathroom. My grandfather disciplined me very severely. Of course, I learned to hold it since then. I can hold it for days if necessary. Story 92. As a child, I couldn't make it home. I was playing by the sidewalk and just let it fly right there on the sidewalk. Story 93, wooded area of a golf course. I found a chain link fence on the perimeter I could lean my back against as I bent down. On the other side of the fence was the back of a brick, single-floor industrial building that was not in use. As I was letting it rip, I heard a bell ring. It was an elementary school, and children started exiting from the back of the building. Story 94. Out on a weapons range in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, there was a small shed with a bench that had 3 holes to sit over. No stall doors, no privacy, just 3 holes side by side on a bench. There is no stronger bond between co-workers than soldiers who have to sit side by side and defecate. Story 95. On a car hood in a McDonald's parking lot. While making eye contact with the attempted rapist who owned the car, I put a foot long down his windshield and dented the roof and trunk with my weight. The sheriff deputy who worked security wouldn't let me in because he knew what was happening. He stood at the front door and watched, just shaking his head. The man had gone out with a friend, took her to a distant city park, and told her to put out or get out. She got out, walked 4 miles back through 2 unsafe neighborhoods, until someone finally offered her a ride. I came into town late that evening, but when I found out, the manhunt was on. Story 96. Laid out some rags in the back of my van and a bottle over my penis, then ditched it in a rubble sack and threw it in a dog waste bin. Had diarrhea while in Scotland once and had about 20 bowel movements that week. Had to stay armed with a packet of tissues and gloves at all hours that week. Climbed a pylon atop a hill in Sheffield to get a nice view. While smoking a joint, I had the sudden urge to pass gas and just let it fly from up high. Also defecated directly into a waste pipe stack on a roof in London because it would have taken 15 minutes of going through gates, checkpoints, and security permit offices just to use the restroom. Left a large stool in a hole on the green of a golf course during a drunk walk home. Defecated at the top of Grouse Mountain in Canada. It is probably still there, frozen. Story 97. I am here too early to see the really crazy stuff. I am calling it, though. Someone is going to say someone's mouth or chest. Story 98. Sitting on a log right over a wasp's nest. I thought having diarrhea on a camping trip would be the worst part of my day until the wasp started stinging me. Story 99. I am an avid cyclist, and one day I was coming back from a ride on a very hot day when my stomach started bubbling. You know that feeling where if you move an inch, you might lose control of your bowels. I was riding on a frontage road, and there was no chance I could make it another 20 minutes home. I saw a strip club that had not opened yet, and in its parking lot, there were 2 dumpsters. I barricaded myself between them, and before I could get my cycling shorts fully off, it started coming out. It looked and felt exactly like the scene with Jeff Daniels in the movie Dumb and Dumber. I rode home with an incredible sense of relief, but with a burning, irritated discomfort because I could not clean properly. Pro tip: bring wet wipes because you never know. Story 100. Went out disc golfing by myself. On hole 1, I shanked my disc into a heavily wooded area. I found my disc and immediately felt an urgent need to use the restroom, knowing I would not make it back in time. I squatted with no plan for cleanup. While doing so, I looked down and noticed an old winter hat sitting right there. It fulfilled its final duty for mankind. The rest of the round was completely unremarkable, but I will always remember hole 1. Story 101. Not exactly a strange place, but when I laid a giant log in the woods while wild camping, it was so big I got my son and took him back to see the sheer size of it. When we got there, the whole log was covered in thousands of flies. Well, strange. Story 102. In a winghouse parking lot, I went out with some friends for dinner. While we were standing around in the parking lot, I suddenly had a severe stomach upset. It was awful. Story 103. I was in the beginning stages of understanding irritable bowel syndrome. I was 2 years into a relationship with my current wife. We had a camping trip into the deep forests in Utah. We stopped at Sam's Club and grabbed the little extras we forgot. My wife took one of their pizzas. I could not help myself. I wolfed down 2 slices and headed up into the woods. The 2-hour drive through winding roads was beautiful until it hit. There were 4 trucks in our family convoy. Here I am, lead truck, pulled over maybe 40 feet into the trees, spewing out the worst thing. I could hear my girlfriend laughing hysterically from the truck. I guess I wasn't as concealed as I originally believed. I turned around and looked up, and there were families on a hike who could see me. Not my proudest moment. Definitely won't be my last. Story 104. Years ago, I dropped my daughter off at school. Driving back, the coffee kicked in. I made it back to my house and forgot the garage door keypad had been malfunctioning for about a week. I punched in the code 3 times, but it just flashed and would not open the door. I concluded that I had to do something or I was going to soil myself. I ran to the backyard, opened the crawlspace door, and went under the house. I grabbed a flower pot and relieved myself in it, then threw it in the trash since it was trash day. Then I went back to the door, and the code finally worked. I ordered a new keypad after I took a shower. Story 105. I work in home care and couldn't hold it one time as I was leaving a patient's house. I ran around to the side of their garage and had a very unpleasant bowel movement right in their yard. I don't know what I ate that morning, but it did not want to stay in me. Story 106. Not me, but I have been around a few wild ones. I was repairing a walk-in cooler at a bar in my city a couple of years ago when I heard a commotion from the staff. Apparently, a man was drunk and on his way to the bathroom. He defecated in the elevator. He then went back and sat at the bar for a while. Another time, when I was in a high school gym class, we all heard someone yelling about feces on the floor. The janitor came, knelt over it, took a sniff and said, "Yes, that is feces." We thought it might have come from outside, but it did not lead anywhere. It was just a lone piece. I do not know if they ever found the person responsible. Story 107. Bush in a family video parking lot. I got food poisoning and couldn't make it home. An elderly man from the Chinese restaurant might have seen me. Story 108. Behind and on a rock, off an off-highway vehicle trail in the middle of Johnson Valley during King of the Hammers, I had a terrible case of diarrhea. Story 109. In the mountains during the military field survival course. It was not all that crazy, really. However, it was very wet and cold. Story 110. Behind a tree in a patch of woods between 2 firing ranges. One range was for crew-served weapons, including .50 caliber machine guns, M240B machine guns, and Mk44 cannons. The other range was for Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. I was not in any danger, but dropping a turd while .50 caliber machine guns and Bushmaster cannons were firing was pretty wild. Story 111. In about 3 feet of snow behind a closed gas station, looking for the northern lights during a trip to Lapland. Story 112. In a Comuna 13 bar in Medellin, Colombia, there was basically a portable toilet in the middle of the bar with gaps like the worst public bathroom stalls. The floor was sticky with cocktails, and there was not even enough room to spread my legs. I also had to prepay for toilet paper and hope I had enough. Story 113. Overlooking a beautiful mountain lake in British Columbia on a gorgeous morning. The birds were chirping, the wind was blowing, and the sun was shining. The most peaceful experience I have ever had. Story 114. In the woods behind a client's house. It was that or have volcanic lava on my pants for the rest of the day. Story 115. Bathtub in a Japanese hotel. I am not very tall at 6 feet 2 inches, but I could not fit in the small cubicle that the toilet was in. Story 116. Lived in a rusty old yacht in a marina in Italy doing some restoration. There were no working toilets. Late at night, I would squat over the marina wall and relieve myself straight into the sea 2 or more meters below. It made a very satisfying deep splash sound. I'm sure I hit a fish once. The public toilet that was open at all hours was about a 2-kilometer walk. Story 117. I really had to go. I ran into the pharmacy store knowing they did not have a public restroom. I bought a toilet paper pack. I walked out to their dumpster, which was gated in with a walled enclosure. I did not see a camera, so I relieved myself behind the dumpster. Mission accomplished. Story 118. When I was younger, we would do mushrooms and go for walks in snowstorms, ending up at a nearby park. I immediately needed to use the bathroom urgently. If you know mushrooms, you understand. so I trudged and jogged through knee-deep snow to the outdoor bathrooms. It was late at night, and I needed to go. The moment I burst through the door, a very audible alarm went off. The motion-activated lights did not turn on. There I sat, feeling very intoxicated, with an upset stomach, worried that the police might arrive while I still had more to do. I flicked my lighter to see where I was in this dark place filled with a loud intruder alarm amidst the overwhelming environment. So, I guess you could say the craziest place I have used the bathroom was there, but it is a bit more nuanced than that. Story 119. On a trip to Dallas, we went to the Book Depository Museum. My dad and I had stomach aches and got separated. I saw him an hour later at Dealey Plaza. I had clogged the toilet at the depository, and my dad did the same at the Dallas Holocaust Museum. Not a proud day. Story 120. I am in Chicago. The Blackhawks are playing to advance to the Stanley Cup. The bar is packed, and I feel very nervous. I ask the doorman to let me out to use the restroom and then come back in. He tells me if I leave, I will not be allowed back in. The men's room has no stall doors, no exterior door, and no toilet paper. I had to relieve myself in front of 500 people and used a cardboard roll as toilet paper. Story 121. Cornfield. Also the best bowel movement I ever had. It was 115 degrees Fahrenheit. I realized that a sweaty backside keeps the process very clean. I wiped, but it wasn't even necessary. Now I have a clean backside and prepare it beforehand. It's unpleasant, but the more you know. Story 122. I was working outside behind some townhomes and condominiums when I suddenly needed to use the bathroom and had no time. I moved into a wooded area behind them as best I could to conceal myself and relieved myself. I am very thankful to whoever had my work van before because they left a roll of toilet paper in there to help clean up afterward. Story 123. On someone's lawn late at night while my daughter and I were browsing a little library. Diarrhea. Home was far. The second time was on the sidewalk grass in a cul-de-sac. I was late for work a couple of houses down in Carpentry. My girlfriend, the mother of my children, was present for both and provided me with wipes. Story 124. Water fountain on the front lawn of a police station. I was extremely drunk, went for a walk, and realized I would not get to a toilet in time. The fountain had some broad-leafed plants and water to wash up in amid lots of close-cropped grass. I did not realize it was a police station until I was done. Story 125. Hanging off a tree branch on Devil's Lake in North Dakota. The tree used to be on the edge of someone's driveway. That lake has come up over 30 feet in the last 30 years. Long day fishing and I couldn't hold it anymore. Story 126. Yesterday, 15 feet off a paved and heavily populated walking trail near my house, I had to make a quick decision. It was either find a place in the foliage or walk back to my car in discomfort. Fortunately, there was a moderately thick section of foliage, and I was lucky that nobody was within 100 yards when I stepped off. The whole episode took maybe a minute. Story 127. I am in a McDonald's. I have a story to go with this. I was working as a merchandiser for Nabisco. I was the person putting products on store shelves. I had an iced coffee from Dunkin' before I went to the store where I was merchandising. I showed up early because that's just the kind of person I am. When I entered the store, I saw the lights go on. I went straight to the bathrooms, but the men's room was closed. I returned to my car and went to the gas station nearby. I asked the clerk at the desk for the bathroom key, but he didn't have it. I ran back to my car and was almost having an accident. Almost out of hope, I drove to the McDonald's across the street from the store where I was merchandising. I parked my car in the lot, ran into McDonald's, and saw the men's room was open. I ran in, found a free stall, and after I sat down, I felt so much relief. Story 128. I used to climb cellular phone towers. I relieved myself in the Santa Cruz Mountains from the top of the highest tower there. It was wild seeing the tops of airplanes while doing so. Story 129. Walking on a sidewalk, I really had to go to the bathroom. I drank a weight gainer protein shake earlier while walking with a friend to the gym and back. On the way back, the weight gainer kicked in. While walking on the sidewalk, I went to the bushes to relieve myself and used nearby leaves to clean up. My friend was laughing and said, "This is something you would see in the movies." Story 130. Construction site. Satellite door is locked. What the heck? Laid a steamer right there on the front door. Locking a satellite for Christ's sake. Story 131. I'm just a normal person from Los Angeles. Not a flirt, a hiker, or mountain climber. No swimming in the ocean. Just a city boy, smoking marijuana and drinking 40-ounce beers. Playing video games and mini golf. Boring, right? Story 132. I was in the trunk of a brand new Porsche 911 Carrera at the dealership. I was there to meet a friend who invited me to dinner. She got caught up with a client and left me in the showroom. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.